The work of technology has a lingering reputation of being built and biased in whiteness. How can that change? Welcome to the TWIJ Show, a weekly interview series from Technically on building better workplaces. I'm your CEO and your host, Christopher Wink. Today we're asking, how can tech firms be more intentional about diversifying who they are and how they do their work? I'm joined by three colleagues here. I have Uva Coles. She's a diversity and equity inclusion strategist who just transitioned from a career in higher education into a consulting practice called Inclusiva. We'll hear more about that. We're also going to hear about how this work happens on the ground from friends at Promptworks, a 32-person custom software development company. We'll have Jess McManus. She's a talent acquisition specialist, and Nichole Phoenix, operations and community engagement coordinator, joining me. So many words. Hello, you guys. Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
Morning. All right. So I've been reporting for 12 years. A bunch of these engineering teams end up being heavily white. And I think the answer is they're just white because there's only white engineers. That's it. Can we just leave it at that and that's just done? That's why?
Yeah. I think that's a podcast. That's an episode.
We are done.
We did it.
You're saying no, is my understanding. That we got that we can expect more. This isn't just every engineer in the world is just a white man?
I mean, I've met so many that are not, so I would say that is a misconception.
Ah, dang. All right. So lesson one, not exclusively white male. Got it. Put it a little more broadly. Is it the constant stance we have is, well, we hire people from these colleges who have this degree level, who have had this experience. I super want to hire differently, but like the only people I find, they're all white guys. So like, what am I supposed to do? It is a network effect, yeah?
Yeah, so I think you touched on it when you said people from these colleges, right? It begins with these colleges. And so the question becomes, what colleges are you going to in the first place? So part of the challenge of recruiting with diversity in mind and really being intentional is you have to rethink the way that you are approaching everything, right? And so the very first step to that would be consider where you are casting your net. Because if you are casting your net into waters that are white, male dominated, your yield is going to be exactly that. If you're really looking for diversity, then the question becomes, what are the colleges and universities that perhaps haven't been in my consideration set that have the kind of talent, including diversity, because competency and diversity absolutely coexist. So what schools might we be able to approach that may have the talent we're looking for? That's one piece. The second piece is, let's be honest. Most of us are looking for, we look for comfort, we look for chemistry, we look for people who look like us. Many of us, as we're recruiting, tend to go to our own colleges and universities. We look for our friends. Who refers most of our talent? Our friends, right? We go to trusted sources, and that's okay in theory, but again, that will continue to yield what it yields. The other opportunity here is to consider how to widen, D-E-N, not T-H, your network, right? So let's really consider untapped resources, organizations that really focus on talent that might be diverse and engage in conversations, partnerships, and relationships that may yield a completely different set of outcomes. So at a high level, bottom line is the talent is out there. The question mark begins, how are you thinking about your recruitment practices? And I suspect that Jess and Nichole probably have a lot of lived on the ground experience about how to do this the right way.
Yeah, I mean, let's do. I mean, Promptworks, you're an important case study. You do some of the most advanced, challenging software development there is. You do custom-built software development. This takes a degree of skill and length of experience in a trade that has a decades-long lack of investment in communities of color, underrepresented technologists, and so factually, there are a disproportionately fewer number of people who do that work than the communities you serve. And that's something in our reporting we've always struggled. There is a difference there. Like, what does that then look like for a firm like yours? How do you confront those very messy, very real issues? What does that mean for a firm like Promptworks?
I think since I've been with Promptworks since about March, and Promptworks takes an all-encompassing approach. We start with working with Coded by Kids and HopeWorks and all of those organizations that are helping children in tech. And so we're going to start at the very beginning, because we've discussed, you know, there is that skills gap. How do we get the skills to people that want to be in these careers? And also paying attention to the fact that maybe people have nonlinear career paths. Maybe they aren't a college graduate, but they do have the skills needed to perform their role. So can we look at those requirements when we are posting roles? And do we need to have a college degree there? How are we building our networks? Nichole can speak a little bit about the meetup series that we host at Promptworks.
Yeah, and Chris, I wanted to circle back because you did touch on something that was really important, especially regarding Promptworks, is that we are a smaller company. We build custom software, right? And our team is mostly allocated, right? We don't have people just sitting around working on these evergreen projects. And there's so the pipeline and how we fit our team and how we allocate their time is very conscious, right? And so the big question became, okay, we want to mentor, we want to share skills, we want to be able to tap into communities, but we need help because our individual engineers only have but so much capacity on top of full-time work. And so things like HopeWorks, things like our meetups, things, especially our community programs, ways that we can set up chunks of time, set up hackathons, set up times to sit and talk and do resume reviews, all of these things, and building these relationships and keeping these relationships alive are really important, because it's like we have this sea of talent to draw upon, and it might not be right now because we might need like a senior developer, someone who's been working and very highly skilled, but our network continues to expand in that way. And we really love being able to be connected to young talent, as well as people who are maybe looking around. So I think that's really important when we talk about a company's capacity to give that education and give that mentorship and those resources, being smart about it. We have to be smart about our time, and putting in that effort and looking for ways to leverage it has been a way that we feel good about being able to give some of that time back.
So maybe widen this, and I wonder if, I think Uva might have thoughts, given your background and work, Uva, in these big systems of what leads to this. I'm fascinated about responsibility. That I think in the last decade or so, what we woke up to is a whole bunch of private sector companies. Promptworks is 32 people, which I think it's a tall ask across the reporting we do to say, why hasn't a series of 30-person companies solved a systemic workforce shortfall, or decades of policy failure and lack of investment in communities and educational pipelines? But it's essentially where we are, that we've said, well, we're seeing economic gains in a portion of our private sector that now has to take on a responsibility, because who the hell else is? But I'm wondering if you have thoughts on like that, the lack of representation in advanced degree holding positions like computer science and even just skills needs in software development is this like massive systems problem that we are now trying to solve for at an organizational level. How are you approaching that in your higher education work? Now you're doing consulting practice. How are you tying like massive systems to on the ground work? That's the most challenging question I can ask you, so feel free.
Yeah, and how much time do we have? So I think Nichole touched on it, and it's this idea of, you know, we want immediate results, and that's part of the challenge. We want to be able to solve this quickly, and for good reasons, right? If we have a business need, if we need that senior person for a very technical position, the conversation about pipeline then becomes challenging. That's just noise. It doesn't really address the challenge that I have at hand. And so I understand the urgency, but when we are talking about systemic solutions and really increasing that P word, the pipeline, right? Then we have to consider systemic solutions, and systemic solutions are going to require time, which means that you have to invest in the pipeline from the very beginning. And I would actually argue that although companies then say, well, we can focus on, you know, colleges and universities, it begins much earlier than that. We know that at the elementary school level, girls are already discouraged, really, right? They're not really encouraged to participate in STEM, right? And so that's a challenge. And we know that it's not that a teacher is standing before a classroom and simply addressing all of her energy and concern and driving those who identify as boys, right, into STEM. The reality is there are underlying challenges to our education, to our educational system that really begin to seed these disparities early on. So as massive as it sounds and as convoluted as it sounds, you asked a system question. The reality is we have to consider the root causes. The root cause for us is how we have built an educational system that is really not designed to be equitable from the very beginning. And that lack of equity then shows itself throughout that educational continuum and eventually shows itself at our doorsteps in the workforce, right? Which sounds like, it makes it feel very hopeless, right? It's so overwhelming. What can we do? Well, what we can do, and I think that is where the work that Inclusiva does comes in, and there are quite a few numerous companies, especially in this moment, that dedicate themselves to this work. We have to partner with those larger systems to really consider how to support the immediate need and how to build long-term solutions. And you can do them in concert. It's what Nichole and Jess do, right? Very locally or at scale. We can widen that, different ways of bringing in talent. Sometimes we are completely attached to this idea of credentials. Have very little to do tech, and that's not to diminish the role of competency or being educated in the field, but the field may not necessarily require a college degree. So we can reimagine what those credentials ought to be. Organizations like HopeWorks, I think, do a phenomenal job of taking in talent and really focusing in on the skill set that is actually needed. Then when you couple that with an employer or a system of employment that is really being thoughtful about competencies, right? Not necessarily the credential, but the competencies that are needed, you're then able to bring in talent that can really meet the need. What it requires at the end of the day, Chris, is we have to take a step back and we have to be honest about how we have approached the workforce with a very traditional mindset that has really marginalized a number of different communities and identities, and really rethink and reimagine how we think about talent and then build towards that. Massive, but possible. We've seen it done in some companies.
We're coming up on time, so actually I want to take that back to Promptworks and put a hypothetical to you. Jess, you alluded to, and I mean, you guys have named HopeWorks, which is a program that focuses on youth in Camden, New Jersey. You guys mentioned Coded by Kids, which does youth coding and an array of entrepreneurship and after-school STEM learning programs across a few markets, a few cities, including Philadelphia. I got to imagine that Jess and Nichole, if you guys are at a happy hour, if we ever go back to happy hours, and you're talking to an HR.
We have them every week.
All right, fair. An HR or a software firm that might say to you, man, investment in like fifth graders and high schoolers and college, that's a level of responsibility that, you know, I can't take on in my software firm. It's not my problem. It's not my responsibility. And I wonder if you're at that happy hour and someone says to you, that's not my responsibility.
That does not sound like a Promptworks team member at all. That's,
well, no. You're at a happy hour
that's a huge type of, with like some other people who,
yes.
who aren't awesome and who don't work on my team. No, I'm kidding. I think, and Jess, I'm not going to cut too much into what you're going to say, but I mean, from the top down, it's very clear from leadership what is important. It's always been very clear. And so just modeling behavior within our organization is 100% always comes before our actual written copy, our mission statement, all of these things just underline what we believe. And so I think anyone who would hear that, at least from me, I would point them to several of the organizations that we work with, and say that, you know, there is time, there are ways to do it. And in the few hours that you might put in, right, the few days or however many, continue to circle back on this and work and find something that supports your mission statement or the values that you say you might have. But I think it's totally feasible. And I think challenging other organizations is the key, right? So if we can do it, you can do it. It's totally possible. So I think just when we talk about responsibility, passing that on to other people and other organizations, even in our personal lives, is really crucial, especially in this time.
Yeah, like Nichole said, attitude reflects leadership. So if you're being led from above to, you know, really invest that time in the youth, you're going to, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So I think really at that happy hour, I would stress to the person, like, this is an investment. You're not going to see gains tomorrow, but you're going to see gains in the future. And regardless, we need to invest in our children. We need to invest in education, especially in this time where education is really getting defunded across the board, where students are learning virtually. It's really a key time to get involved with the youth and figure out what motivates them, figure out how we can help them out, how we can help parents that are, you know, probably struggling right now with trying to juggle virtual work and virtual learning. So it just seems to me like the right thing to do. So I don't know if you're really going to do a lot of work convincing folks that aren't convinced to help kids.
I mean, that might be the important takeaway. So in our final roundup here, if our setup here is how do technology firms expand or break out of network, some of what I'm hearing is, one, recognizing the broad system this is in, but and so because of that, it's an investment over time. That Promptworks, the case study here is, when we wanted to make change, we had to make a bunch of bets, a bunch of investments, from the youngest age we could find through to thinking, you know, right now, what is our network? You know, both, it's at the professional level, all down to into the, you know, as young as we can go. I wonder if we could send folks off with any other tactics or strategies. If I'm watching this and I want to say, I'm trying to change or shape the network of my hiring pool or tech firm today, I have some role openings right now. How do I shape or rethink some of my network so I don't just do the 5 people I went to college with? What are things that people should take away now?
I think always just look at your habits, look at your knee-jerk things, look at, like, when you're going to make a decision or fill out a job description. Don't just copy and paste the one from before. Really look at that, what you're doing, look at what you're perpetuating, look at every detail that you're easily just, you know, following down the line, and see how you can change that. And I think the change comes in the tiny details.
It certainly begins with that job description and being thoughtful about what you are messaging. Within that message, you are already setting up either a very inclusive invitation to your company, or you are signaling what you're really looking for may not be fit for inclusion, right? So you have to be really thoughtful about that. But beyond that job description, who are you sending out there to represent your company or organization, and what are they saying by virtue of not only their words, but their very presence? It's important to make sure that you are, that there's a diverse, that there's diversity within your approach to recruitment, which brings me to 2 things. One of them is make sure that you're not tokenizing. No one, whether you're a woman, a person of color, it doesn't matter what your identity or your diversity might be. You don't want to be the person that's only sent out there to represent a company. If you are not able, if you don't have the competency for it, one, in this moment, I think part of what we're doing mistakenly is just going to wherever the gap is, assuming that a person has competency or interest in representing from an identity space, and that may not necessarily be their job. So be thoughtful about what you're doing with that, and do not tokenize. But if you have the right person who by virtue of their role and their interest is the right person to represent your organization, and you are actively working to make sure that they are certainly not the only person who looks the way they do or who is, whomever they may be, then you also want to make sure that they are going to spaces that are going to be more inclusive. Because even if you send this person of color or this Black woman or a woman, period, right, into these spaces, but there's still spaces that do not necessarily have diversity, you're still going to have the same yield. What I guess I'm suggesting is you have to be intentional. You have to rethink every single part of your recruitment process from beginning to end. And that means that when you are even interviewing, you have to rethink your questions. There's so many interesting things you can do. The challenge is it requires a degree of self-reflection, and being reflective isn't something that we do very well, either personally or organizationally, which is why this space of inclusion is growing wider. You need more people who can come in, sit with you, and give you an honest assessment of the challenges, the barriers to true inclusion your organization is facing, and more importantly, provide you some solutions that are going to not just mitigate, but really dismantle, right? Dismantle the barriers that you have to truly building an inclusive culture. So I know you want this crisp answer, what can I do? The reality is there's some things you may be able to start with. Everyone can start somewhere, but the real work means that, as you would with any other organizational priority, you're going to have to come up with a strategy to truly diversify your space. And whether you have a large budget to do it or you need to begin small, you need to dedicate some resources. The key word here is investment. If you're interested in diversifying, you're going to have to make an investment, and the scale of that investment is going to meet your outcomes.
I like that. Nichole, I wonder if you help send us out. I mean, I'll almost reframe it, knowing like the level of community engagement you've had for some time. Building on Uva's word of investment. The takeaway here is a lot of different options or bets is what I keep coming back to. You have to say that long-term play, the immediate play, the place we were working, and how you tell your story over time as an organization. It doesn't like, I posted on this one jobs board that said it's diverse. Done.
I don't know what else to do. Yeah. Personal challenge, right? Looking at your personal and professional network, starting with yourself, where you are within an organization, really sort of pushing back sometimes, or really, seeing if your organization is meeting the goals that they say that they want to meet, or that they are actually, and there's nothing wrong. We have our own DEI committee, right? There's nothing wrong with presenting resources. There's nothing wrong with going to your HR person or whoever is in charge of DEI, if that's a thing within your organization, or saying, hey, maybe we should have a DEI committee. I mean, there's so many personal investments that you can make. A little anecdote is that many people before coming in for an interview will go to our website. And over the past few years, I've noticed that I would get random emails, Instagram messages, Facebook messages from people who saw me tokenizing, not to say that I'm the token Uva, but saw someone who they said, oh, this person shares an identity that I have, whether it's me being a woman of color, a Black woman, and they wanted to know like the real deal, so to speak. So I'm going in for this formal interview, I'm going to meet the panel, but I want to talk to you, right? And so it's very important, getting back to Uva's point, that culture is there, and that no matter what you put on your website and whatever you put on your social media, all of these splashy things that sometimes can be representative of what you think DEI could or should look like, that how your employees are truly, how your team feels about being within that organization will pay off so much more than like a splashy website photo or a sponsorship of an organization. So the investment within your organization and the culture will 100% yield better results, because everyone has their own individual network. And when you have those conversations at happy hour, at over coffee, or, would you mind taking a look at my resume? The same thing that happens with everyone else. That individual's experience is going to be so much more telling than maybe what Glassdoor has to say, or what what the office feels like when you come in for an hour or two to interview. So I'd love to encourage people to start thinking about opening up your doors of your organization. Physically, we can't do that, but letting people know who you are as an organization before they ever step into the door, so to speak, for a position, that they know who your organization is, what their values are, because they've met you and they've actually seen you do the work. So I think that's also important from an organization standpoint, is like, once you get them in, you have to keep people, you need to retain them. And a big part of that is how they feel about themselves within the organization. That's just a little tip.
That's fantastic. Telling stories, investments over time, many layers, retain voices that can speak on your behalf. Those are some of the small elements to start you off on a building and changing your network effect. That has been this week's TWIJ Show. Thank you. You'll see we have other videos linked here, including how to improve and invest your own diversity committee at your company. Make sure to like and subscribe, of course, and look for notes on Technically and Beyond. Thank you, Uva, Jess, and Nichole. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thanks so
much.
Bye.